homework, and all of those things. And she realized that what happened there as a family was a whole lot more important than what might happen there as far as fashionability goes. And she liked seeing it through this new lens, this new perspective, hence Perspectacles. Now these are two very difficult bits of scripture. Each one of them is hard enough to understand on its own, but for some reason the committee that puts together the lectionary that I preach from chose to put them together this week. I wonder why. For that matter, I wonder why Matthew put them both together, because surely he could have picked some other story to stick in between these two when they were walking on the road. Lots of things happened. Now sometimes, when people preach on the story of the Syro-Phoenician woman, or the Canaanite woman as she is in this translation, they wonder out loud whether Jesus was really as bigoted as he sounded when he first spoke to her, and that he had his heart changed by her response to him. And of course, that's always possible. He was, after all, fully human, and he had faults, and he was raised a Jew. He'd been told his entire life that the Jews were God's chosen people, superior in all ways to all other people. He had been raised to believe that God's blessings were restricted for Jews alone. And it might make sense then for him to withhold the healing that this woman was asking for her daughter. He could have had his mind changed by her comments. I mean, even though Jesus is also fully divine, we know that God sometimes changed God's mind, like when he chose not to destroy Nineveh, even though that did upset Jonah quite a bit. Or maybe he was just pretending to be bigoted and to have a change of heart like this in order to make a bigger impact on his disciples, who, not surprisingly, said, "Send her away. She's bothering us." The same way they said to send away the 5,000 hungry men, women, and children, who we heard about in the story of the loaves and fishes, and in the same way that they tried to send away all the children that parents were trying to get blessed by Jesus. I kind of lean toward the Jesus teaching his disciples a lesson school of thought, because Jesus, luckily for us, always had a different perspective on healing and feeding and blessing people than his disciples did. What if these two stories relate to each other in a way that we had not really considered before? Let's see. At the very beginning of this chapter, before the part that I started reading, the Pharisees say, "Why are your disciples breaking the elders' rule that was handed down to us? They did not ritually purify their hands by washing them before they ate." So Jesus tells the crowd they need to look at the law from a totally different perspective. Jesus says what goes into the mouth ends up in the sewer, so it contaminates nothing. Rather, it is what comes out of the mouth, from the heart, which contaminates. Things like evil thoughts and lies about other people and insults. Then in practically the next breath, he likens the Canaanite woman to a dog, which is pretty insulting, especially at that time. He chooses to withhold healing from her innocent, demon-ridden daughter just because she's not Jewish, which is surely evil, because bigotry is evil no matter who does it. Jesus is busy showing the disciples and all the other people that follow him around everywhere that it's not just the Pharisees who have a problem with narrowness of perspective. This really would have been a good week to not have a television or an internet connection. Our beloved comedian Robin Williams committed suicide. Thousands of refugees were stuck on a mountaintop with no way to get off and no way to get humanitarian aid. Airstrikes were ordered in Iraq. Christians were targeted and killed by the radical Islamic group ISIS. And here at home, tensions between police and civilians in some places became even more strained than usual. The greatest focus, of course, has been on Ferguson, Missouri, where demonstrations over the shooting of an unarmed teenager were met with an unprecedented show of force by the police department. Now, the videos that are being played and replayed show the St. Louis County Police stationed on top of armored vehicles, aiming assault weapons at unarmed civilians, and deliberate tear gas attacks on the media. It's a frightening example of what's being called the militarization of the police. A phrase, by the way, that is meeting with a great deal of objection from veterans groups who say the real military wouldn't be using this kind of force against a crowd of unarmed civilians. I don't know if that's true. Never been in the military, so I don't know if that's true, but I do know that calls from all sides of the political spectrum are being made for the federal government to investigate this and other cases in what seems to be an escalation in unnecessary force being used by police departments around the country. The shooting death of Michael Brown in Missouri and Ezell Ford in Los Angeles and the death by strangulation of Eric Garner in New York are just the ones getting the most press right this minute. We've heard these stories from a multitude of perspectives. We have heard new details from so many sources, from coroner's reports and police reports and eyewitness reports and pundits and commentators. We've heard from stories according to the family and according to videos taken at the scene, and I don't know if we'll ever fully understand what happened or why. Is part of this overreaction in Ferguson merely the result of all those lovely military toys that were just kind of begging to be used as long as they had them? You know, some have suggested that. Would it help at all if police departments weren't given such easy opportunities to obtain military-grade weapons and vehicles? I don't know. I do know it's been pretty clear that systemic racism is playing a large role in what's been happening, and that is evil. That has to be dealt with. These are questions that government agencies of every size will be dealing with for some time to come. But it's also clear that police everywhere are being demonized for the actions of a few, and that is also evil. Has anybody remembered that in the back of every single police officer's mind is the memory of their brothers and sisters who were killed in what looked like benign situations? And maybe some of the reactions we've seen in seemingly safe situations comes from that memory. It is what comes out of the mouth that contaminates the person. Bigotry, false testimony, evil thoughts, slander, insults. These contaminate a person in God's sight. I've been doing some directed writing lately, answering questions in a Bible-based workbook that are intended to improve my spiritual life. One of the questions that I answered this week was, how does your life reflect your image of God? That was a real aha moment for me as I struggled with that question. You see, like some of you, I often struggle with how some people can call themselves Christian and yet be so angry and so judgmental all the time. How can they oppress those who are different from themselves or approve of that oppression if they call themselves Christian? This question, how does my life reflect my image of God, made me see those people through an entirely new pair of perspectacles. People in 12-step programs are encouraged to come to know and believe in a higher power of their own understanding. Many, like me, arrive with understandings of a God that is angry and judgmental and punishing, what we often call the Old Testament God. That perspective, by the way, is also a little bit skewed, but we'll talk about that on another day. My understanding of God has shifted about 180 degrees in the last couple of decades. The image that I have of a God today is a loving, caring parent who suffers while watching me go through pain, but has to let me make my own mistakes. who is always there for me, to catch me when I fall, hold me when I reach out, comfort me when I cry, who angers slowly and forgives easily, who understands my human frailties and loves me anyway, for exactly who I am, who is less concerned with how well I follow a set of rules than with how well I treat myself and other people. Along with the change in the way that I understand God has come a change in the way I think about and relate with other people, with other humans, and with the rest of creation. I try to see God's image. I try to see the face of Christ in every other person. It is not always easy. So when I ask myself, how can that person believe she is a Christian and hold that belief that she holds about gays or the poor people or immigrants, then I'm asking the wrong question. The question I need to be asking myself is, what is her understanding of God, and how is that God's image reflected in her life? How do you see God? Is the God that you know hate-filled and angry, or compassionate and just, merciful, forgiving? Is God focused on how well you obey a set of rules, or how well you treat your sisters and brothers? Is the God of your understanding the one who refuses to bless somebody because they're of a different faith, or is it someone who loves all of creation? And how does the way that you live reflect your understanding of God? Now, I'm not saying that any one perspective of God is the right one, or that the list above is really either or. I mean, it could be both and. I can't say that this or that is the right way to understand God, because God is way too big for human understanding. Each of us has a unique perspective, formed through our life experience, that brings us to our own understanding of the God that we've been learning about all our lives and that we keep learning about every day. That understanding changes as we grow, as circumstances bring us new perspectives, as we learn to see glimpses of God's truth. May God open